Welcome to the Evergreen Thumb, your go-to podcast for up-to-date research-based horticulture and environmental stewardship knowledge to help you grow and manage your garden. Produced by Washington State University Extension Master Gardener volunteers and brought to you by the Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State. I'm your host, Erin Hoover, a WSU Extension Master Gardener since 2015 and a certified permaculture designer and modern homesteader. WSU Master Gardener volunteers are university-trained community educators who have been cultivating plants, people, and communities since 1973. Are you ready to grow? Let's dig into today's episode. Welcome to episode 53 of the Evergreen Thumb. My guest today is Jim Kropf. Jim is here today to talk to us about fire-resistant plant picks. Jim is the WSU Pierce County Extension Director, the WSU Extension Director of County Administration, as well as the WSU Extension Natural Resources Program Leader. Jim has been a faculty member for WSU Extension for 47 years. He was the area agronomist in Chelan and Douglas counties for 14 years, followed by 4 years as the area horticulturalist for Pierce and King counties. In addition to providing technical production skills for farmers, he focused on direct marketing, training for new farmers, and on-farm research related to horticultural crops. He also continues to provide training and leadership for the WSU Extension Master Gardener program. He has a BS and an MS in agronomy from Washington State University. Jim, thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work with WSU?
Okay, I'm Jim Kropf. I've been part of Washington State University for 48 years. I've started 46 years now in county extension. I started out over in Stevens County in 1979, moved to Chelan and Douglas counties and had an office in Waterville for 14 years, and then moved back home here to Puyallup in 1995. And in 1995, I got started in extension administration as a district director and then lead natural resource programs for WSU Extension, director of county administration. So I work with our county directors and our 40 offices across the state and lead the Pierce County office. So one of the main program opportunities I have is to train master gardeners. So in, I think it's up to about 12 counties, I do training on various topics for the Master Gardener program.
Great. So you're here today to talk to us about fire-resistant plant choices for our gardens. And so why don't we talk about what's fire-resistant? What makes a plant fire-resistant, and how is that different from fire?
Similar to waterproof and water resistant, we have plants that could be considered fire resistant and others maybe that are fireproof. And fire resistant is if there is a fire next to it, it doesn't immediately burst into flames, but over time or over a short period of time, it can certainly do a lot of damage to the plant, maybe carry a fire and destroy it. Something that would be fireproof would not feel the effects of fire. It would not burn, it would not carry a fire, and subsequently not die. So what makes a plant either at least fire resistant or maybe fireproof? If the plant has a high moisture content, all of our plants have a high moisture content, but if a plant is largely dead or has a lot of dead foliage on it or accumulates a lot of needles and things like that, that part of the plant is going to have a low moisture content. So a high moisture content is certainly important. Low oil or resin content. And you think about working with Douglas firwood. You don't have gloves on. Pretty soon you have pitch on your hands. And that would be resin or pitch in that plant. And that certainly is susceptible to fire. So plants that have low resin or low oil content is important. Ones that are drought resistant, they don't immediately dry up and have dead foliage hanging on them. So if they stay green all throughout, especially the fire season during the summer and fall, it would be more resistant to fire and drought resistant. Plants that are well adapted, that grow well in this area, that have green foliage and new growth, that is resistant to fire. And then an open, loose branching habit. If we think about a maple tree and an oak tree, there's branches, but you can see through the tree more so than something like a fir tree, which a Douglas fir tree is pretty much capable of burning anytime during the year. And probably the best example of a plant catching fire, or the worst example of a fireproof plant, would be something like junipers or arborvitae, where they can very easily burn regardless of the time of year.
Would native plants then generally be considered better suited for fire resistance in the landscape?
Native plants can be, but we have to remember that we have native plants like Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, and there's native junipers in parts of the dry part of the state. Those are very susceptible to fire. And we've seen some of our most devastating wildfires in the state over the last 100+ years. That includes ponderosa pine and Douglas fir trees. So the bark of a ponderosa pine may not burn, but the needles are very susceptible to fire and carry a fire very well. So native plants can be, but native plants can also be very susceptible to fire. We think about native grasses. During the green growing season, native grasses would be very resistant to fire, but we know what happens to those plants during a long, hot, dry summer and fall after a very moist spring. They make a lot of growth. They go dormant during the summer. There is literally a ton of dead growth out there that is very susceptible to fire. So many of our native plants, they stay green year round. They can burn, but they don't really carry a fire, or not really susceptible to fire like a conifer tree would be. But overall, native plants, year in, year out, regardless of the climate, can be more resistant to fire. But again, they are absolutely capable of burning.
How would fire resistant plant recommendations vary in the different regions or different ecosystems within Washington?
Yeah, there's no quick answer to that one. I mean, we range from, I don't know, 300 inches of rainfall at the Olympic rainforest to 6 to 8 inches of precipitation when we get out to Lind and Vantage and some of the very dry parts of the state. So, and we go from sea level to over 14,000 feet in elevation. We go from areas that don't get much in the way of a frost right along the coast to, we lived in Waterville, where I remember one winter it got down to 28 below zero. So there's no one answer for all of our ecosystems or climates across the state. We have, however, a lot of choices in Western Washington. We have a fairly mild climate, and not everything grows here, but pretty much things will grow here either on an annual basis or will be adapted as a perennial. And providing it doesn't have, like I talked about in an earlier answer, if it has low resin content, it's drought resistant, it's well adapted, those plants are going to grow well to Western Washington. Eastern Washington, we're going to have limitations. We have a lower USDA hardiness zone. So not everything grows over there that grows in Western Washington. So you have to be a little bit more choosy about what you select to make sure it's adapted to the climate. First of all, will survive the winter, will survive the hot summer, and then look at some of the attributes of those plants to make sure it is not as susceptible to burning.
I think a lot of people don't really realize how varied our climates are in Washington. I looked at a map one time, and I think the USDA climate zones range from like 3 all the way to 9, which is pretty extreme.
It is. And then year in and year out, we're going to have variations. This year in Puyallup, we didn't get our first frost until December 2nd, which is unheard of. And then we went through the rest of December without any temperatures lower than 30 degrees. We finally got some cooler temperatures where it was in the mid 20s, but some areas of the state didn't even get that cold. So just the overall warming of the climate over the last 50 years, and then looking at rainfall differences. Who would have thought that 3 years ago here in parts of King and Pierce County, we would have reached 116 degrees, and not for one day, but for multiple days. And seeing western red cedar and seeing other conifer trees in the Issaquah area, all the new growth in July just absolutely brown where it should have been a nice lime green color. So all of those type of things certainly set us up for more difficult choices to make sure things are adaptable and can grow in our climates.
How much does maintenance factor into the fire resistance of landscaping?
It's huge, and I do master gardener training, and I focused on Pierce County, but I've done a couple other counties also, where I do teach the master gardeners, the interns or the trainees about, and it depends on the county. Sometimes it's called fire resistant landscaping, sometimes it's called wildfire preparation, but whatever we call it, maintenance and planning is a huge part of this effort. So when we look at some of the things that we consider, absolutely proper plant selection. Do not plant highly flammable plants such as arborvitae and junipers, especially close to buildings. So this was very, very common back in the 1960s, 70s, and earlier years. Junipers were very available. They're very cheap to plant. They required very little moisture and did great. Unfortunately, they're one of our more flammable plants. So proper plant selection is number one. Number two, rake up dead leaves, rake up conifer needles. Don't let those accumulate in the plant, under the plant, on the roof of the house, in the gutters of the house, anywhere that they can be exposed to fire. Just have them cleaned up and put them in the compost pile, put them in the yard bin, get rid of them so they don't present a problem if fire comes your way. Remove low branches that are close to the ground where a ground fire can move up a tree and potentially to a building. And we see some of our weeping trees, weeping conifers, where the branches go right down to the ground. And if there was any kind of a surface fire, say fireworks or a cigarette started a Bar Harbor juniper on fire and it was burning, then it caught a low hanging branch of a conifer on fire and then moved up the tree, that's bad. So we can limb up a tree a little bit just to have space between the ground and the branches so a fire does not move up a tree and potentially catch a building on fire. Watering is important. Keep landscape properly watered during the hot, dry season and follow good irrigation practices. We don't have to put a ton of water on there, but we can time our irrigation to rainfall, how hot it is, and do a good job of conserving water while keeping our plants in good shape and less susceptible to fire. And people that are on a well out in rural areas certainly have to be cognizant of it because they do not have an unlimited water supply. And even if you're on a municipal water system, there may be water restrictions during real hot, dry periods of time, or your budget may limit how much water can be put on a yard. Simple things. Don't stack firewood next to your house or on your porch, something that can easily catch on fire if there is a fire and spread to the house. And many people plant lawn alternatives, but a green lawn is a great fire barrier. So we talk about a lawn having little habitat value. People complain about, well, you can't eat it, it's high maintenance, they use a lot of pesticides and fertilizers and waters. Well, this is a good time when a green mowed lawn is one of our best friends if you are in an area that is prone to wildfire or if a wildfire does happen in your neighborhood. So lots of opportunities for proper maintenance just to prevent things from happening.
How can homeowners make a difference in preventing wildfires in the first place?
Part of it is certainly education, teaching neighbors, being involved in the Master Gardener program is a great way. Implementing those practices in your yard so you don't have weaknesses that are very easy to prevent or solve that can cause problems. It used to be all of our houses around here, a good share of the houses were roofed with cedar shakes. And with cedar shakes, also called kindling. And if you were to have a fire Uh, Really burning in an area, and then there's embers. One of the easiest places to start a fire is on a cedar shake roof. I use a neighbor down the street his place as a PowerPoint slide because there was a cedar shake roof on the house. There was cedar shake siding, which was very common in the 1940s and 1950s, a cedar fence that comes up to the house, kind of doing everything wrong. And if a fire ever starts, it can be bad in spreading that fire. So homeowners they can take notice, they can do an assessment of their property, they can do their own thing, certainly to mitigate or reduce the risk. I mean, anything can happen, and who would have thought we would be in the news daily in the Los Angeles area in early January? When we start talking about 15,000 or more structures destroyed, and these aren't just houses located out in subdivisions out in the brush or in the trees. These are city blocks located in areas of Los Angeles where you'd never think fire would spread. When a fire happens like that, if you're in an area that's getting 50, 60, or 70-mile-an-hour winds, and this has happened in eastern Washington, this even happened Labor Day 2020 in western Washington, it's very hard to stop a fire, and the embers are going to blow for miles. But you can do things to help mitigate the risk short of a disaster hitting an area.
How can gardeners balance the water conservation with maintaining the safe fire landscape?
That's where native plants can really come into play. Plants that are adapted to the area. They're better acclimated to an area and more adapted to surviving a hot, dry summer. Proper planting techniques can certainly help. So you're planting properly to allow that plant to thrive, improving soils through compost and things like that. So plants do better. And all of this helps conserve water. And then when people are watering, don't turn the irrigation system on for 10 minutes every day, whether it rained an inch that night or it was 100 degrees that day and we haven't had any rain in months. Know how much water is required per week for that lawn. Take into account any effective precipitation and balance that with your available water or your home budget to make sure you're able to afford that water or have that water available and adjust accordingly. If a lawn for Western Washington requires 1 inch of available water per week, that's ideal. But some weeks it's cooler, some weeks we get some rain, some weeks it's warmer. You can certainly adjust down, and you don't always have to have the perfect lawn, the perfect plant, so adjust accordingly.
Can you suggest some specific fire-resistant plants that are good for landscapes?
I mean, there would be a whole laundry list. PNW 590, fire resistant plants for home landscapes, and this is an example of a publication that has many suggestions in there that would be good. I believe that one is suited for the whole state. Some counties are going to have specific planting sheets that will give local recommendations for plants that would be more fire resistant. But what's easier to talk about are some of those characteristics that make a plant more fire resistant or those that are susceptible to fire. So should we avoid when you are selecting plants to put in your home landscape? Avoid plants that contain fine, dry, or dead material with the plant. And if you ever look at an arborvitae shrub and say it's 20 years old, you take the branches, you open it up, you look inside, and you will find literally gallons of dead needles, scales, foliage sitting in there, plus fine dead branches. All of that will burn immediately. If a firework hits that, a cigarette hits that, it's going to burn very rapidly. Leaves, twigs, and stems that contain volatile waxes, terpenes, or oils. So oils, resin. If anyone grew up in California, you think about eucalyptus and what eucalyptus oil smells like. All of those type of things are very volatile and can burn. Leaves are aromatic, strong odor when crushed. Think about some of our conifers and think about eucalyptus. Sap is gummy, resinous, and strong odor. So fir trees may have looser, papery bark. You think about birch trees and the native, growing more in more moist areas, but anything that has real loose bark can burn versus something like a ponderosa pine bark that can be multiple inches thick and not burn so easily. So those are ones certainly to avoid. Again, most deciduous trees and shrubs are fire resistant. Both native and ornamentals can be highly flammable. Fire resistant plants have leaves that are moist and supple. They have little dead wood. They don't accumulate leaves or dry material in their inner core. Sap is more water-like, and sap or resin materials are low. So when you feel the leaf, crush a leaf, break a branch, or anything like that, you can get an idea just from that list of what would be a good plant to plant if you're looking for fire resistant.
Okay, and we will link to that PNW 590 to that publication so listeners can download that and use that as a reference as well.
Chelan Douglas has their fire resistant plant selections publication. I think that's separate from 590. They also have a publication called Arborvitae Plant Torches. And many of these publications will also talk about zones in your yard, such as defensible space, 0 to 5 feet from the house. You don't want flames touching your house, so be careful about what you plant really close to the house and don't have it touching the house or branches hanging over the roof of your house. 5 to 30 feet, stop the fire spread. And that 30 feet area, you're in that defensible space. And this was in Puyallup about 3 years ago, and it was just a mile down from the experiment station, and it was mid-May. All of a sudden, there's the fire alarm, you hear sirens, and in mid-May, an arborvitae hedge accidentally caught on fire, and the fire just raced down that hedge. And it was only about 10 feet from the house. Thankfully, it was a brick house, so the house sides or walls did not catch on fire. But you get up to the eaves and you have wood and you have the soffit vents or the vents in the eaves that can suck the embers right in there, which it did and caught the attic on fire. So then you have an attic fire and the firefighters have to get in there to put out the fire. If there was defensible space, they may have had a chance. If there was a wood-sided house, it probably would have been a total loss, even though the fire station is only about a half a mile from the house because it happened so fast. The neighbor's house wasn't touched. There was an asphalt driveway. It was about 20 feet away. It didn't go back any further because the next planting, the hedge extended into a laurel hedge, which singed the edge of the laurel hedge, but it stopped it from carrying the fire any further. And so the arborvitae hedge was taken out. It was replaced with a 6-foot high steel fence or a steel bar fence that looks really nice and kind of a hard way to learn a lesson. But there are more and more stories around that. And it's important to note, and I condition my presentation to master gardeners in Pierce County that even though you may live in downtown Tacoma or the north end of Tacoma in a residential area, we're all still susceptible to fire. Some of you live in 100-year-old homes that would burn very quickly. But remember, we have people that smoke, there's construction accidents, we have homeless encampments where there are campfires and propane tanks involved that can easily spread. There can be a car that catches on fire just on the other side of your hedge that you don't even know that's there. And I've seen some of the worst fires around start along, especially I-5 along the freeway. We're in the middle of summer. Somebody pitches out a cigarette. It scoots across the shoulder of the road into 3-foot tall dead grass, catches that grass on fire, races up the hillside. And typically, what's at the top of the hillside besides houses? Well, maybe there's that arborvitae hedge. Maybe there's that cedar fence, followed by an arborvitae hedge with a short short space of lawn, and then wood siding or vinyl siding that absolutely melts and catches a house on fire. So I'm always very, very concerned about houses built along freeways because they're kind of an accident waiting to happen. So as building codes have changed, that's been very helpful in our subdivisions because many of our houses are only 6 to 10 feet apart, and they have some type of a concrete fiber siding that is obviously very fire resistant and helps reduce the chance of fire spread.
Well, that kind of leads my next question was about the real possibility in urban areas. And I think that's on the forefront of a lot of people's minds with the fires in LA. You think you're not going to have a wildfire that spreads into an urban neighborhood, but we've seen it happen in California.
Yeah, and I've seen enough cases, especially like in arborvitae plantings. Just in our extension office in Tacoma, there was one planted island out in the parking lot, and I think it was, I don't know if it was a cigarette or if somebody was just trying to cause trouble and started that little island on fire, and it completely destroyed the junipers. I mean, it was 50 feet to a building, so it didn't cause any problems in that. But know that those kind of things can be real problems. So we don't want to have problems from things that can be easily prevented. But being in highly urban environment certainly doesn't prevent fire from happening. In 20 Labor Day 2020, we had the fire in Sumner, and as where I sit, it's only about 2 miles as a crow flies across the valley to where that fire hit. In the middle of the night, red flag warnings for the previous few days from an east wind. And just like LA, we know whether it's winter or summer, nothing ever good comes out of a east wind in this area. And it was 90 degrees. You have very low humidity. And I believe that one, they ended up finding that power line caused a problem, but it burned in the trees. It burned into a subdivision. It caused many other issues. And some of the pictures I have and the night pictures, you'd swear it was somewhere in eastern Washington or some other part of the country, not in very urban western Washington. And I've got a lot of other pictures from this area where most of the fires have started along major commuting routes and spread from there. And we have had loss of life also. 2 years ago in Lakewood, where close to the freeway, pasture fire started, got into a mobile home park, destroyed a couple trailers, and killed a couple people.
So, what steps can gardeners take to retrofit an existing garden for better fire resistance?
Assess what you have. If you have plants that are beyond their life for all practical purposes, they're weak, they just aren't healthy, there's dead branches, consider what to take out. Consider what to prune back where it's close to the house. And, consider not planting things so close to the house. It can be not only for fire reduction, it can also be for security, where you can't have people, looking in windows, I suppose, and having the security of cover. And also insects getting into the house, rodents, and things like that. Just plant plants a little bit further away from the house and avoid foundation plantings and maintain that type of space. So one of the best things people can do is thin, weed out, and plant things that are smaller, slower growing, and using the tips on how to, I guess, assess a plant for its ability to burn or not burn.
Based on recent wildfire seasons in Washington, what are the most critical takeaways for gardeners in fire prone areas?
In fire-prone areas, I guess plan for the worst and hope for the best is always kind of what you think. I know there are places in eastern Washington where if we have high temperatures, low humidity, strong winds, even a mile or two buffer isn't going to prevent fire from coming through an area. We've seen that up in the Okanagan in 2014 with the absolute worst conditions. Um, People can become part of a Firewise community, and this is quite often led by a local conservation district where people work together to mitigate fire issues, learn about wildfire behavior, and have a wildfire plan, including fire breaks installed, water availability, an emergency plan for escape, and things like that. So people have to think much beyond just the home landscape, but they absolutely have to provide that defensible space, knowing the normal conditions that you can have during the summer wildfire season in many areas of eastern Washington, and don't compound the problem by planting high-risk plants close to the house or other buildings.
You mentioned the FireWise communities. Are there other resources to help communities implement fire-resistant landscaping?
But yeah, Washington Department of Natural Resources has resources, conservation districts. I mentioned ours where we have an extension forestry team. They don't get so much into fire control or fire outreach. They more help people recover after a fire. But there can be local tip sheets that we have in our extension offices. Fire departments, they have safety days quite often, and they can have giveaways and assessment sheets and how to develop an emergency plan. And then many counties have, or all counties have, emergency management departments. I know King County, for example, has a very well developed emergency management plan when it comes to wildfires. And that's a good website to look at also. And I think they stated 85% of all wildfires are human caused. And I've seen figures over 90% are human caused. And even if it's power lines, people built power lines. Nature maybe helped bring them down, or lack of maintenance didn't help the situation. But again, when you consider the ways that nature starts fires, lightning, maybe a lava flow, and beyond that, it pretty much comes down to humans being the cause of wildfires. So anyway, we can put safety in the equation, mitigate human activity when it comes to wildfire. We'd be much better served.
Thanks for joining me. This was fun.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Evergreen Thumb, brought to you by the WSU Extension Master Gardener Program volunteers and sponsored by the Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State. We hope that today's discussion has inspired and equipped you with valuable insights to nurture your garden. The Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State is a nonprofit organization whose primary purpose is to provide unifying support and advocacy for WSU Extension Master Gardener programs throughout Washington State. To support the Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State, visit www.mastergardenerfoundation.org/donate. Whether you're an experienced master gardener or just starting out, the WSU Extension Master Gardener Program is here to support you every step of the way. WSU Extension Master Gardeners empower and sustain diverse communities with relevant, unbiased, research-based horticulture education. Reach out to your local WSU Extension office to connect with master gardeners and tap into a wealth of resources that can help you achieve gardening success. To learn more about the program or how to become a master gardener, visit mastergardener.wsu.edu/get-involved. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay connected with us, be sure to subscribe to future episodes filled with expert tips, fascinating stories, and practical advice. Don't forget to leave a review and share it with fellow gardeners to spread the joy of gardening. Questions or comments to be addressed in future episodes can be sent to hello@theevergreenthumb.org. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by guests of this podcast are their own and do not imply endorsement by Washington State University or the Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State.